Happy Monday, listeners of Liberty. And before we get into today's interview with Joshua Childress, I want to tell you about an awesome concept, an awesome program called Health Excellence Plus. This is one of our first sponsors, and they are an incredible free market alternative to our standard, corporatized, government-manipulated, government-regulated health insurance. And if you are just sick of dealing with health insurance, with high deductibles, with the Obamacare mandates, you have to check out Health Excellence Plus. I recently did an interview with the co-founder, Jeff Cantor. I will post that over at lionsofliberty.com/health, where he really digs into the specifics of this program. A lot of you have had questions about it. A lot of you are in an open enrollment period with your work or what have you and have some decisions to make. So I implore you to check out Health Excellence Plus. They do not have an open enrollment period, by the way, so you can sign up with them all year long. But I know for many of you, you are in a situation based on the government and corporatized rules that you have to choose their healthcare services within this small window. So while you're weighing your options, you must check out Health Excellence Plus. You will be shocked at how much money you can likely save, depending on your situation, of course. So you can find that all at lionsofliberty.com/health. And I will also post the link over in today's show notes, which you can find at lionsofliberty.com/429.
Welcome to the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here's your host, your guide, your shining beacon of liberty, Marc Claire.
All right, my guest today is a veteran of the Afghanistan and Iraq wars and a former Border Patrol agent. He has since quit the Border Patrol and become a passionate voice speaking out against our current border policy. I first heard him on Thaddeus Russell's Unregistered podcast some time ago, and I'm pleased to welcome him here today. He is Joshua Childress. Joshua, are you ready to roar?
You bet. Let's do this.
Awesome, my man. Now, Joshua, I think a lot of our listeners have possibly heard you on some other shows on the aforementioned Unregistered with Thaddeus Russell. I know you've been on a Pete Quinones show, Free Man Beyond the Wall, a couple of times. But what I really want to get into you first with is kind of where you were before you got into even the Border Patrol or even a soldier, really. I'm kind of curious what your political thoughts were when you were younger, and then kind of maybe what sent you down the path to joining the military and eventually joining the Border Patrol. What really inspired that part of your life?
Wow, there's a lot there.
Yep, take it away. We got all the time in the world.
I come from a very blue collar upbringing, I guess you could say. My dad was a carpenter. My mom, had some jobs here and there, but it was largely just a homemaker. I say just a homemaker. I'm going to catch some feminist shit for that, but
and if you didn't catch it for that, you're definitely going to catch it for saying feminist shit.
Yeah, exactly. They'll get you one way or the other. But I like feminism. It's all cool. So I was raised kind of in small towns. We moved a lot. My dad, due to my dad's job, and we ended up in a tiny, tiny little town in Colorado. That's where I ended up going to high school. And God, there was nothing there. It's beautiful, really nice people, and I looked at the people that were sticking around, and like the ones that didn't go to college, they'd stick around and get a job. And I was just like, that's not what I want for my life. But I had I'd always done well in school, but I just had no interest in it. So by the time my senior year came around, there was no prospect for scholarship or anything like that. And so the recruiter showed up and was like, "Hey, we'll get you out of here." And I said, "Oh, okay." So there wasn't it wasn't a patriotic deal at all. It was necessity. I didn't want to stay there. I wanted to go somewhere where I couldn't leave.
It was a ticket out of town, essentially.
Right. If I would have gone to college, say I could take out loans, and I can always just turn tail and run. Right. You can't do that in the Army. So it was kind of I knew myself well enough to know that they would keep me away. Was that sort of
an intentional way to box yourself in, to sort of force yourself to commit by joining up with someone that was going to force you to commit, kind of whether you wanted to or not?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, it was 99. So it was, I joined in 99, and there's no horizon of war as far as I could see. So I thought, I'm going to go get some job training. I was a welder that was my job skill that I learned in the Army.
Maybe I'll shoot some more at the range and, do some exercises and
Right. Yeah. I got paid to work out every day. It was kind of a sweet gig. They sent me to Korea, was my first duty station. And, it was still peacetime. It was very peaceful there. So, we went out every night. It was great.
And obviously that changed a couple years later.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so. As far as like philosophically, my father was very, very conservative, and I would work with him over the summers, and we listened to Rush Limbaugh, G. Gordon Liddy, Dr. Laura, very, very right wing. That was my first kind of exposure to politics, but I loved it. I really, really enjoyed hearing the concepts and the ideas and everything. So, I kind of ate it up. But being a rebellious young man that I was, I left home and just threw it all out the window. I was into kind of alternative music, punk rock, some hip hop stuff like that. So kind of countercultural stuff anyways. And, once I was out on my own, that's just really, really what I gravitated towards. I didn't really hang out with other Army dudes. I'd go and like find a coffee shop and like hang out with the other punks and the raver kids and like the beatniks, and it just kind of anybody that was like not normal I wanted to be around. So that was kind of where I found myself early on in life. And so my first real exposure to libertarianism, because I would come home on leave and talk to my dad about all these new political ideas I'd been finding, and
right.
I called myself a liberal. And he's like, I don't think you're as much a liberal as you are a libertarian. So I looked it up and I thought, okay, well, that does fit pretty well. So I started reading a little bit, and so the pendulum's gone back and forth on that throughout my life. It's very far in one direction right now, but
yeah. So this is before you really firmly held those views. You were just like kind of researching it. You heard the word, your dad said you're this, and the ideas started to seep in, but you weren't by any means sort of a hardcore libertarian at that point, I would say.
Right. And I didn't even know what it meant. Right. The economics of it didn't even come into my views till much later. It was more like, oh, I want to do whatever, I don't want anybody to tell me what to do. I must be a libertarian. Right. And I read a lot of Robert Heinlein early on. Oh, yeah. So that was kind of, rather when everybody else was reading like Bastiat and everything like that, I was reading Heinlein and I was like, okay, this is my political philosophy.
Right. So how did things change for you when you first heard about 9/11, when you first started getting new orders that were probably way off base of what you originally thought you were going to be doing in the military? What was that whole experience like?
God, it was strange. So just on that day, I had just been sent back, to our headquarters from our motor pool to pick up some paperwork, and happened to walk into the office as, and it's on TV and I'm watching it go down, and I'm just like, okay, things are, it was just like very clear. Things had just changed, and on everybody's faces, they were like, go back, tell your guys what happened, tell them like, we're getting ready. Mm-hmm. And we didn't actually right away. I was a welder for an artillery unit. There wasn't a whole lot of use for our type of artillery in Afghanistan, so we didn't go to Afghanistan right then. And then, but immediately it was like, come and go as you please, just show up to work was our mindset then. Overnight, it was like, we have 24-hour guard rotations on base, and there's lines to get in and out of the base because there's like super tight security now, and you have to actually show your ID to get in. And it was just overnight, things completely shifted and never went back to the way they were before. We
know from your story, of course, that in your time as a Border Patrol agent, we all know you started to question that eventually quit. But I'm curious, in your time in the military, were there points where you started to question that mission as well, or were you not really, at that point yet?
So going to Iraq, I was pretty deep into punk rock and very skeptical about everything, especially everything government related. And I hated the military. I thought it was a stupid it's like the most inefficient way to do anything. It really is just a
You mean bombing things isn't the most efficient way to
from the ground
deal with
up
our problems?
I mean, just like, I think Einstein said something to the effect of like, I have no respect for any man that marches in columns and rows. Like, just from the mind, just the way that they walk across the street and everything that they do, it's just inefficient and stupid.
And it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition between your interest and love of punk rock, because what's less punk rock than being in the military and lining up in roles and following orders? I mean,
right. Yeah, it was, that part of me blossomed at very much the wrong time.
Mm-hmm. Maybe the right time.
Or the right time, yeah. But, walking around the barracks in like plaid and spikes and steel cap boots, you get some looks, especially from the higher ups. But anyway, so back to, when I found out I was going to Iraq, I was like, I just assumed, okay, weapons of mass destruction, we got to go do this. So I guess I was mostly along for the ride. And honestly, I cringe looking back a little bit now, but I was just like, I'm a part of history. Like, I'm going to go experience a part of history. I was very excited about that. I have always, not always. I was kind of a puss growing up, honestly. But, being in the military and kind of pushing myself a little bit, I did, develop a thirst for like excitement and adventure. So the idea of flying around the world and going to a foreign place and like seeing something brand new that most people will never see, that was very exciting to me. And I went, and it was a very not exciting deployment. I mean, we got mortars launched at us on a fairly regular basis, but they were very inaccurate and nothing even got close. So it was just like, you got used to it, and it was there were neat parts about it, but so I went, and I only spent 5 or 6 months there, and then I was supposed to be getting out, but they held on to me just to go to go on the deployment. Mm-hmm. And then once, quote unquote, the mission was accomplished, when the president stood on the ship and said, mission accomplished,
we're all good.
Yeah. Those of us that weren't considered essential, we could go home. So I left, and I don't know, I didn't really think that much about it. And then it was, I got out, just went to work. And then a few years later, I was like, wow, these wars are still sure going on.
Right. Didn't we accomplish that mission? I could have sworn we were told.
So there was of me that looked at that, and I thought, well, these guys that I liked, that I liked hanging out with, and that, that I've served beside, they're still over there. They're still going back. And I only did that one little time. So there was like a part of me that just felt like I needed to do more, So that's when I joined the National Guard. I found out that the Arizona Guard was going to Afghanistan. And I literally joined it to go to Afghanistan. Because I knew they were going right away, and they're like, well, it's a 6-year contract. I'm like, well, I'll just ride the other 5 years out. That's fine. Wow. So I did. I went to Afghanistan, and I reclassed to infantry, so I wasn't just a welder. I was actually out going on patrols and stuff like that. And still, it wasn't all that exciting. It wasn't what I was looking for. I kind of wanted that excitement. I wanted to experience that oh crap moment of like, am I going to live or die? And, there were some kind of scary parts, but it never materialized to be the Hollywood version of it that I was seeking.
Right.
Luckily so.
Was that like somewhat disappointing in a way? Like, was it not as exciting as you thought it would be?
It was. Part of it was the excitement that was lacking, but also part of it, as previously stated, it's a horribly inefficient machine.
Right.
So we had a really good group of guys in my platoon, and we could have accomplished a fair amount of things, but our chain of command was just so scared to do anything, scared to get involved in anything. So they basically shot down any missions that we proposed. So we more or less walked around a lot and like showed a presence was what we, like a show of force or a presence patrol, like basically just showing people, hey, we're here. Don't forget that we're here. So a lot of it just felt like wasted time. And there was, I'm analyzing everything all the time.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So there were definitely points where I'm, sitting on my cot thinking like, yeah, I don't really blame these guys that are like shooting rockets at us and like taking pot shots at us. Like if they came to Colorado or they came to Arizona and set up shop and march through my streets, I'd be taking shots too. So like,
right. It's like that famous Ron Paul speech where he says, what if there were Chinese troops in Texas? How would we respond if the same thing was reversed?
Right. So there was that, but I'm also a little stubborn. So, in my mind, well, just because my little National Guard unit was a little inefficient and not doing things the best way, well, that just means special operations. Those guys, they go in bed with the locals. They go and like work with the locals and find out the nitty gritty. And like they get the good intelligence and they're the ones that are actually getting stuff done. Right. So that was what I decided to do. Instead was start trying out for that.
So you still sort of had the Hollywood image in your mind of that side of things, of like the special forces side.
Right. And I'll say this, I was single, no kids, no wife. It was just me. So I had the luxury of making all these reckless decisions.
Right.
So that was basically when I got back from Afghanistan. I worked for like a year and I wanted to go back to school. So I went back to school full time. Started using my GI Bill. But I also started training to try out for special operations. National Guard has a kind of a pathway to do that. And then you have opportunities to go active if you want to. But anyway, so I was training for that, going to college, and I just happened to put in an application with the Border Patrol off of the advice of a buddy of mine. He's like, yeah, he did it for his civilian job. He was in the Guard too. And he's like, yeah, I think you'd really like it. If you like being outdoors, you like guns. It's kind of exciting sometimes, but you're basically on your own. You don't really have anybody telling you what to do. And I thought, oh, cool, that sounds interesting. So I put the application in and kind of forgot about it. I mean, it's a really long hiring process. It took close to 2 years before I actually got a job offer from the point that I put my application in. So I'm going to college and it's time to either sign up for the next semester, go do my tryout for the Special Forces, or take this job offer from the Border Patrol. Mm-hmm. And there was no patriotism or, love of country or anything built into this decision. It was literally just, well, if I go to the Border Patrol and I don't like it, Army and college are still going to be there.
Right. So, it's not like the Army where they're going to keep you in, you get the job, you can quit like any other job.
Right. So it was purely just a logical deduction. Mm-hmm. And so I went for it. Did you have any
thoughts going in? Like, did you have any like political ideas or philosophical ideas about immigration, about borders? Was this even something on your radar?
Well, so in between my time in the Army and the National Guard, I mostly worked construction, and we didn't have podcasts then. So really the only thing there was talk radio, because I don't really, there was none of the music that they played on the radio was my kind of thing. So talk radio was the only thing I had. So, I mean, my only real opinions of immigration policy came from what Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck had to say, right, which was basically, well, legal immigration is good, mm-hmm, illegal's bad, stop the terrorists, et cetera, et cetera. Right. So that was kind of I didn't have really strong feelings one way or the other. It was just like, well, the job needs to be done. May as well be me.
Right. So you're going into this with the job, maybe with a vague idea about immigration or borders, but it doesn't sound like something that was a major issue you thought about. And then, So what was day-to-day life like as a Border Patrol agent? Like, what was a typical day like? How often were you actually encountering like literal, immigrants that you had to actually physically, I don't know if you're chasing them down on foot or what? What was that experience like? Or how often was it maybe just kind of boring, like just sitting around and waiting?
So I went to Yuma, and Yuma was in like 2005, 2006, 2007 being completely overrun. I mean, it was a madhouse. You can go on YouTube and see videos of like, just groups and groups of people just rushing across. And then, so that's when George W. Decided to take action and went down to Yuma and got all the fences built. And, by 2008, all the fencing and everything was built. And they called it, they got it under control. So, activity kind of died off and they thought, oh, we won, we solved the problem, because their apprehensions just went from like hundreds a day to like a few a week. Now, and that's kind of the story that they told us as we were coming in. They're, giving us the history of Yuma Station, and they're telling us that. And I don't remember when it was, but somewhere along the way, I was like, they're all coming here for jobs. And in 2008, something happened with all of our jobs here in America. Yeah. Maybe the fence didn't do as much as we thought it did. Maybe it was there stopped being jobs for them to come over to look for. So basically, they put up the fencing, and if you just look at that section of the pie, that slice where Yuma operates, apprehensions did go down. But if you look at the stations to the east and the stations to the west, their apprehensions probably went up a little bit.
They just found, a different weaker point to come through.
Right. Or a longer, more dangerous, section of desert to cross through.
Now, some people might hear this, and regardless of their thoughts on immigration, might be thinking, oh, so walls do work, fences do work. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, do you think this is, but the moral part aside for a moment, is that kind of thing an effective way to stem illegal immigration?
It is effective to a point. So I like to use San Luis as a kind of a metric. And, it's in the very corner of the state of Arizona, the southwest corner. And in that little corner of the state, there are 3 layers of fencing. There's a really, one of those really tall fences, and then there's maybe 50 yards, and then another tall fence, and then just enough room for a vehicle to drive through, and then a chain link fence. So there's 3 fences right in a row, and they have to get over all 3 of those to get into the neighborhood, which is like a football field away. So if I'm working in San Luis, Arizona, on the west side, I've got less than a minute. If somebody comes over that fence, the first fence, I've got less than a minute to get from wherever I am to there to apprehend them. So those fences generally buy us that minute. Gotcha. So it can be effective to a degree. Now that's where the closest neighborhood is. Now, if you start going up the north side of the border, and the neighborhood's a little bit farther away, and there's not as much visibility on them, they have cut through the fence with torches, axes. There's this mesh that I've seen that they've broken through with screwdrivers, cordless saws. In the time that I was there, there were 2 tunnels discovered in that little like 2-mile section. So
like underground
tunnels. Right. 2 tunnels in 6 years have been discovered. Now, how many of them haven't been discovered?
Right.
So they are effective to a degree, especially around populated areas. But if you're talking about like a wide open area, which, if they're saying they want a wall or a fence along the whole border, if you're talking about a wide open area, some of those places, that's a 3 or 4 day trek from the border up to a highway.
Right.
So if it takes them 45 seconds to get over the fence, you've delayed their 4-day trek by 45 seconds, and you've spent billions of dollars to do it.
Right.
So it just, like, there's parts where it just doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And there's parts where, depending on your view, it makes a little bit of sense to get a little bit of control.
Hold your horses, kitty cats. I have to jump in here for 1 second and tell you about another great libertarian podcast. And this one is not your typical podcast. This one doesn't really focus so much on the ideas of liberty, but on music. And who doesn't love music in some form or another? I guess some people don't, but who really wants to know those people anyway? Let's be honest. Anyway, the show is aptly titled Sounds Like Liberty. Sounds Like Liberty is hosted by Liberty's favorite nerdy husband, Nick Pacone, and his wife, Lizzie. They speak to guests every single week to find out who has the best music taste here in Ancapistan. And the Lions of Liberty have actually been on the show, at least a good number of us. Myself, Brian McWilliams, and Howie Snowden have all been on Sounds Like Liberty. We're still waiting for the John Odermatt episode, but we're not actually sure if John listens to music because we already know he doesn't watch movies. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to go ahead and go on over to ancapmusic.com and check out Sounds Like Liberty, or just search Sounds Like Liberty on your favorite podcatcher. That's all I do. I stick completely to the podcatchers, but Sounds Like Liberty is an excellent show and really does a great job of merging culture, music, and liberty together. I highly recommend this program. If that wasn't enough, the show is co-hosted by an African-American female ANCAP. I mean, what more could you ask for? And by the way, Nick did tell me to say that in the ads. Do check out Sounds Like Liberty. Go to ancapmusic.com right now to learn more. What were your interactions with immigrants like the immigrants that you apprehended? Did you know, I don't know how much you actually spoke to them. I guess there's probably a lot of a language barrier, but I'm just curious, did you learn anything new that maybe, taught you something about what a lot of these people were going through and the reasons they were coming over that maybe you hadn't thought of before?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, like I said, I worked construction between my time in the military, and as you might be able to imagine, a lot of my coworkers were immigrants in that field, and most of them were super nice guys and pleasure to work with, and hard workers, all that stuff. So I think over time I started to see those guys that I had worked with previously in these people that were catching. So, in muster every day, they like to harp on, well, last night so-and-so caught this guy and they took him back to processing and he had a rap sheet a mile long and, he'd been convicted of murder previously, or he's a rapist or this or that. So they really highlight those cases where there are actual bad guys.
Right.
So that's, I'm not trying to sugarcoat it and say that well, everybody's just skipping across the border with flower petals dropping behind them. No, there are some bad guys. Right. There's still dudes that I'm I remember looking at them and seeing dead eyes and just being man, I hope that dude doesn't fight back. There's some scary dudes down there, but there's also
have times when people would physically resist, or did people generally say, okay, I'm caught by border patrol. I know that I can't fight my way out of this.
Most of the time, they were yeah, you got me, right. Pretty compliant. And even the times where they kind of they'll test the waters a little bit, they'll buck up a little bit. And as long as you just maintain aggressiveness with them and let them know, no, you're not getting, you're not getting the better of me today. Yeah. It usually fizzles out pretty quick. I think in the time that I was there was one shooting. One of the agents ended up shooting a guy he was a guide and had a huge criminal history. So if he would have gotten caught, he would have spent some serious time.
When you say he was a guide, he was guiding other people across the border?
He was guiding others. And his group had gotten caught and he was trying to make his way back to Mexico. And so another agent.
Immigrants will kind of get together and hire someone that sort of leads them in the best way across the border and sort of make sure they get there and then head back.
Right.
Is that how that works?
So that's kind of a little known part about the border. The guides, the cartels that run the trafficking operations, they have complete control of the border. If there's headhunters who patrol around there, on the Mexican side, looking for people who didn't pay. And if you didn't pay, you either cough it up or you're just gonna, they're gonna take care of you.
Would you say the cartels control that side of the border more than you guys control to your side of the border?
Well, yeah, they don't have any rules. So,
Right, yeah.
I mean,
you're not just going to kill their family if they,
Right.
for coming over. They're just going to get arrested and what have you.
right. If I shouldn't say this because it might give some people ideas, but like, if we were completely ruthless and bloodthirsty, we probably could gain control of the border, over at some point.
Right.
But, I don't foresee us ever. I hope that day never comes.
So that begs the question then. I mean, obviously, I bet most of these people coming over would rather not deal with cartels, would rather not, interact with these people that are obviously violent and can, have retribution against them if they don't pay or what have you. So what drives someone to do these things? What drives someone to take the risk of crossing the border? First of all, just the physical risk, and then the added risk of dealing with cartels. Why do people go through all this? What is motivating them to do so? Some people seem to think it's they just want to come here to vote Democrat, which seems like a lot of work just to go vote for Democrats. I don't know if that's the motivation you've ever heard, but I'm curious. What are some of the motivations that you found as you were sort of, encountering these people?
So every person that we catch, when you catch somebody, right when you arrest, you have to ask them, their citizenship, where they came from, why they came, and then you write down all their basic information, and then you send them back to, you take them or send them back with a transport unit to the processing center. And that's where they do all their whole case file, basically their prosecution jacket. And when you're doing that, when you're assigned to processing, you've got 1,001 questions you've got to ask them, and you ask them all the same stuff. Why did you come to America? Well, I came to America because my brother-in-law lives here, and he said he could get me a job at the tire shop. Or, my kid's here. He's a citizen, but I haven't seen him in 4 years, and he wants me to come, so I came. It's literally, I mean, there's a limited number of stories, but they're all kind of revolving around I want to be with my family and I want to work, and
family and opportunity are
right,
the big
right
things.
And they comply with the cartel because they don't have any other choice. It just doesn't.
It's the only way.
Them, it doesn't make any sense to take the risk. They know, it's just built into their thinking. If I'm going to go do this, I have to pay the fee. They just don't.
I want to drive home because a lot of people might, if people that don't fully understand, maybe not listeners of this show, because a lot of people our listeners are very smart, but a lot of people might hear these stories and be like, so why don't they just do this legally? Just do it legally. That's all we're asking. We're just saying, don't come in here illegally anyway. Don't hop our fence, follow our laws, do it the right way, and everything should work out fine. What's the problem with that thought process?
Well, that's what I thought too. Mm-hmm. So I go to the
best person to answer it then.
I went to the academy, and you learn immigration law, naturalization law. You learn applied authorities, which is basically how you can do your job within the confines of the Fourth Amendment, especially, but the Constitution as a whole. Which I was very encouraged that was a class that we had to take. I mean, it's a sobering class.
That is encourage,ing, actually. So somewhat, in the grand scheme.
Well, yeah, you never know how much people throw it out the window once they get to where they're going. But
sure.
As somebody that cared about that sort of thing, I was, and it's taught by a lawyer, so it's not you've got some. Because all the rest of the classes are taught by agents or supervisors. You learn all the classifications for all the visas and the disqualifiers and categories and all that stuff. So you come out of there thinking oh, well, right, there's all these visa categories. Why don't people just take them? But you start to realize first of all, if you've got a guy who wants to come and pick lettuce in a field, which that's what a lot of them just want to do. Yuma is a big agricultural area. There's tons of field work to be done. And, I don't think they're ever turning people away. So if you take a guy, and a lot of the older people that I would, that we'd catch and I'd talk to them, they don't read or write. Most of the younger ones they're more, they know a little bit more English. They can read and write. They're a little bit more educated, but the older ones, a lot of them don't read and write. So first of all, how are you going to fill out government paperwork to apply for a visa if you can't read or write? I mean, that there's a barrier to entry right there.
Right.
But just the system is so convoluted. Just to get a work permit, you have to somehow contact an employer, get that employer to
commit to hiring you.
Basically, yeah, commit
without
to hiring
ever being
you.
able to meet them.
and there's all these hoops that the employer has to jump through.
Right.
So it does happen, but it's like there's such a high barrier to entry. It's such a difficult process for the vast majority of people that want to come.
Even a tourist visa is not easy to get if you're Mexican, even just to come over. And I guess the reason for that being, well, we want to make sure they're not someone who's going to purposely come on a visa just to stay and then work or what have you. Because how terrible.
Well, yeah, but I mean, so I since leaving, I've done a little bit of research, and so visa applications that were filed in, and I don't know exactly the category of the visa, but visa applications that were filed in the 90s are now being reviewed. So like, that's the backlog from if you filed a visa application from Mexico in the mid 90s, the Immigration Service is now getting around to reviewing those applications.
Wow.
So
that's even crazier than I thought it was.
Oh, when I read it, I looked at it a few times and like tried to double check.
How many of those people are just dead now?
Right. And just taking up a place in line.
Yeah, or given up entirely.
Yeah, or just crossed on their own because they're like, screw this, I'm not waiting.
Right. Wow.
So yeah, I mean, there really is, unless you're going to marry someone, unless you're going to school here, unless you have a specialized skill, or, I mean, there's a few other, it's almost impossible. Like there really is almost no legal way to do it.
Right.
And it took me years to figure that out.
Yeah,
but
that's the biggest problem whenever I hear this argument of just do it legally. Nobody that says that can possibly actually, unless they're just being dishonest. I don't think most people are being dishonest. I think most people just don't know. They can't possibly understand how difficult that process is, to the fact that it's, in reality, it's almost non-existent. That's how difficult it is.
For those people, I would say, let's make it easy. Go read Alex Nowrasteh. Go read anything from Alex Nowrasteh or David Beer at Cato.
I'm actually getting Alex on the show pretty soon as well.
He's been, so my biggest fear was that I was going to leave the Border Patrol and then come across some realization that made me realize I made some huge mistake.
Right.
And I was exposed to Alex Nowrasteh after I left, and he and I actually ended up doing a talk together in DC at LibertyCon this year. It was a great talk. But he has 100% solidified that I've did the right thing. Right. Like his work is just fantastic when it comes to this stuff.
So was it really your experiences with immigrants, like one-to-one and seeing them as human beings, that started to make you question the their entire position and the entire, your job overall?
Well, yeah, I mean, I always explain it, or I describe it as like a gut feeling. There was a gut reaction to something isn't right about this. I used to really enjoyed the chase. And then when we'd catch somebody, like, you couldn't wait to get them back and get their fingerprints rolled to see if you got a bad one. Like, you caught somebody.
Because some could be in a database criminal database or what have you.
Yeah, if you go roll their fingerprints and you find out if they've got a criminal history, and you always hope, like, oh, I hope I got a really bad one.
Was there ever like a point system with your coworkers, like, oh, well, making bets on who picked up the bad ones, who picked up the good ones?
Just general bragging rights, but
right.
No. And then at first it was like you kind of start to be able to tell just by body language, looking at somebody's face. Like you can tell if somebody's like wants to kill you, or if they're just like ashamed that they just got caught or whatever.
I gotta imagine the majority of people that you catch are somewhere between just afraid or just resigned to the fact, well, I've been caught and there's nothing I can do. I can't imagine you get a lot of actual violent resistance even when you do catch a quote unquote real criminal.
Right. Those instances of violence are very rare. And like I said, there was one shooting incident the whole time I was there. Maybe a few times tasers were used or a baton or something, but like pretty rare.
When did you first start to really question your job to the point that you were like, okay, I don't think I can do this anymore. I think I have to leave. Was there a certain point in your mind that you can pinpoint where you just started to go from questioning it into a point where you actually had like a moral issue with what you were doing?
So the gut feeling was nagging at me, but I was like, okay, I've got a wife, kids, a house, mortgage payment,
Right.
and a career now. Like, I've been doing this for several years now, and if I want to, I can buy my military time back to add towards my retirement. I'm like, am I going to throw all this away for a gut feeling? So if you don't want to learn anything about yourself, don't ever write anything down. So here was my exercise. And actually it kind of ties back to Thad Russell. So I was going to go to Thad Russell's, his podcast was like my favorite when I listened to it at work, and he was having his live event in LA. So I was.
And this is while you still work for Border Patrol.
So while I still work for Border Patrol.
Uh-huh.
So even though I was having these like gut feelings about it, it was like I still clung to like, okay, well maybe we're doing it the wrong way, but yeah, we still need something. We need some sort of enforcement. Like maybe what we're doing isn't exactly right, but like we still need, you still have to control immigration.
Right. Maybe we can just do it a little better or something.
Right. Like that. So I decided, well, okay, I'm going to write an essay. I've taken English 101 and 102. I'm going to write an essay. I'm going to, cite it and everything. And I'm going to build out my ideas, my case for why some form of immigration control is good. And I started writing it and rewriting it and I'm like, everything that I'm using to justify this job to myself is a fallacy. Like everything is just full of holes and doesn't hold any water.
So you were sort of like defeating your own argument as you attempted to write this in an honest way.
Right. I could have just written it like an AM talk radio host does, and just like,
right.
Just kept writing and like hope that people didn't notice that it was complete bullshit.
Right.
But I kept writing it and I'm like, no, this isn't good. This is not a good argument. So I'd try to rework it. And I got to the point where I'm like, what the hell am I doing? I can't even justify to myself that what I'm doing is the right thing to be doing, or, that there is a justification for it. So that was a kick in the guts, like took the wind out of me a little bit. So I went to Thad Russell's event. And, the first day we went around the room and said what we did for a living. And I told him I was a Border Patrol agent. And he's like,
oh, what are you doing here?
He's like, well, I don't talk to cops. So I was like, I mean, he was mostly joking, but,
right. Joking,
I kind of, I talked to a bunch of people there, and it was, an interesting time, but I didn't really get a chance to, I didn't even know what to ask him. I was just kind of in a state of confusion.
Right.
But he made some time to talk to me after the event. And like, I was like, so what's this, what is open borders? Like, what is this? I keep hearing you talk about it. I hear other people talk about it. Like, you just mean nothing, like just nothing. And he's like, well, Brian Kaplan's kind of the go-to guy for this. Check Brian Kaplan out. So I did. I went and like downloaded a bunch of podcasts and found YouTube videos and found papers and went to work and listened to it all. And that was probably, I would say, when I realized like, oh shit, I can't do this. Like I can no longer ignore it. The unfortunate part was I still had to come up with a plan. Like I had to, with all of the moving parts I'd created, I couldn't just like walk away.
Right.
So yeah, I think it was probably that day I went home and told my wife like, hey, I don't think I can do this. And she was like, wait, what? And it was more just like
work at all or what?
And she was supportive. It was just kind of a shock to her. She was like, wait, what? And then come to find out later on, she was like, I was kind of relieved when you said that you weren't really into it because, the way you were talking about your job in the beginning, I just never really liked it. I'm like, you should have said something earlier. Maybe you would have started.
Where were you 6 years ago? Or
No, she was very supportive, and just having her on board made it a lot easier than it could have been. But
so what was your plan? How did you decide to transition from just leaving this job back into the regular world or whatever you want to call life outside the Border Patrol?
So that's where things get interesting. So she worked from home. She worked for Backpage.com. She'd worked for Backpage.com like since the beginning of the company. And so let's see. I had planned to leave at the new year, the beginning of 2018, and I chickened out. Just because I was like, well, we can save a little bit more money, and we can, buy a little bit more time. And so by March? In March, I'm getting ready for work one day, and my wife comes in and she says, "The FBI just raided the Dallas office." I was like, "Well, do you think they're coming here?" She's like, "I don't know. I'll try to find out." So, within a week, FBI had seized Backpage, and she no longer had a job. So we were going to just, rely on her income,
right?
Get moved somewhere new, and I would figure it out. I had the construction background I could fall back on, and that was what we were going to do. And then we had to come up with a new plan because her income source dried up. So basically, I just kept working, and when it came time to go get my kids registered for kindergarten, she was like, "Well, I'm going to take the boys to Phoenix and get them enrolled in school. So whenever you decide to quit, we'll be there." So it was, because I really was like, as much as I hated being involved, well, and the Backpage thing was just another rub for me, because I was like, I'm a federal agent. Like, right. I'm a government goon. I'm a part of this big stupid machine that just brought down this company that was like a lifeline for sex workers for like.
Sure, because you're evolving here, not just on immigration, but your overall philosophy. So I imagine just like your path into more libertarian way of thought. This is just another thing that, while it's a terrible thing for you guys to deal with, it's just another thing that confirms, okay, I can't be involved in this end of things.
Right. Right. And, where immigration was the genesis of it, but it just, it got the engines going, and like, I just wanted nothing to do with it anymore. The bad part is I love the guys I worked with, guys and girls. Like it was, it's a great culture. Like, it's a great organization. They're fun. These are fun people. Like, they're nice, and we hang out and crack jokes. And I wasn't ever part of the Facebook group, but, so yeah, like,
what did your coworkers think when you said that you were? Did you just say, "Hey, I'm quitting," or did you have some people you were closer with that you were like, "Hey, I think I gotta end this," or how?
Yeah, I had a couple guys that I was closer to that I'd vent to once in a while, and I'd make my comments, here and there, but I never really was just like, "Yeah, I'm done with this," until one day. I would go in and I'd be like, "All right, today's the day," and I'd go in. And then I'd start working. And I'm like, get in a conversation with somebody and be like, I can't do it. Not today. And so then finally one day I just, went, and I was working, and like halfway through the shift, and I went to see my supervisor, and I was like, "Hey, how do you quit?" He's like, the job, like the Border Patrol. I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "I don't know. Nobody really ever does. So let me check on that." So he called his supervisor, and then his supervisor called me and was like, "What is going on?" Uh-huh. So I was just like, "You know what? I've changed my mind. I don't really want to be involved with this anymore. I'd like to quit." He's like, "Well, when do you want to do this?" I was like, "Sooner the better." He's like, "Well, I was working the swing shift, so 2 to midnight." And he's like, "You're off at midnight, right?" I said, "Yeah." He's like, "All right, well, go home and get some sleep. Whenever you wake up, come in and we'll do the paperwork."
So no resistance,
No.
we're going to try to keep you because it's a job and you're
well,
allowed to leave.
I mean, everybody I talked to said like, all the management was like, is there anything we can do? Is there anything, is there like, I guess they were probably covering their butts. Like, was there like an incident that happened? And I was like, no, I've thought a lot about this. I've made a decision. Just got to go. Mm-hmm. My coworkers were just like, are you stupid? Like, you're giving up this money and these benefits and this retirement for what?
Because in fact, listen to some podcast. What?
Right. Well, one of
you're
them,
listening to a podcaster and now you're leaving your job. What is going on here, man?
One of my buddies was like, he's like, so I don't get it. What is it? I was like, look around us. Like, we've got kids and women and like people locked up in glass cages like animals, like for no good reason. What have they done? What have any of these people done to offend anybody? Like, they've not hurt anybody. They're coming because they're afraid of the conditions where they live. They want something better for themselves. They got off their asses to do it, and we're stopping them. We're taking that freedom away from them. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to be involved with that anymore. And he said, he looks at me and he's like, you actually think about this shit when you go home? And I was like, yeah, and it keeps me up at night. He's like, not me. I do my work and I go home.
I go home, slam a 6-pack, and I'm good to go.
Right. And I was like, well, how convenient for you. Mm-hmm. And that was, I think that's probably pretty representative of most people's opinions.
I'm kind of curious now that you're a very outspoken advocate, on immigration, and you write about this, speak about it publicly so much. Are you still in contact with any of those former workers? Do any of them, have any of their views shifted at all? Obviously, you wouldn't want to out anybody who currently has a job, but I'm just curious how if you've had any interactions with them since this time when you're now so outspoken about this.
So I've kept in touch with a couple of them. A couple of them tried to convince me to come back. Most of the people that I was closer to, they're like, hey, I think you're dumb. I think you're wrong, but you're a good guy. I enjoyed working with you. Best of luck to you. Mm-hmm. Now I never went to look, but so, when I did the interview with Thad, Reason also did an interview with me and then, made like a little, 6-minute video or something like that. Yeah. So at some point that video made its rounds back to the Border Patrol. Oh, wow. And that infamous Facebook group. Uh-huh. So one of my buddies who had been transferred to the northern border, he called me and he's like, dude, you okay? I'm like, yeah, I'm good. Why? What's up? He's like, dude, I just saw the video. I didn't even know you were like thinking anything like that. Like, how'd that happen? So we talked for a little bit and he's like, yeah, man, I saw the video on Facebook and like, is that Childress? Like, what the? So I watched it and then I looked down and read all the comments and like, they were brutal. Have you seen them? I'm like, no, I'm not in the Facebook group. He's like, oh man, good for you, man. They're brutal. You don't want to see that. So apparently I ruffled some feathers, but that's inevitable, I guess.
So Josh, I guess after all this journey, after all this exploration, the philosophical journey, leaving a very cush job, I'm curious, what is now today your current position on immigration? I mean, we hear a lot of phrases like open borders, open immigration, but what's your very specific kind of thoughts on this? Do you think we should have like Ellis Island immigration where you just kind of show up and sign up and go in? Or do you think we shouldn't even have that? Do you think there should even be a border? Where are you currently at philosophically on this?
I've got 2 answers for you.
All right, I'll take
my first answer is, and I hate the word utopian because utopia is just a dumb idea. It's not going to work ever. Right. But my ideal is, pretty much Brian Kaplan just came out with a graphic novel called Open Borders, and it does a very good job of explaining, why the sky is not going to freaking fall if we do it. But I like some anarchist version of my talk that I did in DC with Alex Narasta, I forget the other participant's name, but he was
that a video? Was that something recorded? Because I'll link to that in the show notes.
No, I wish. I've bugged them to try to get the video released and nobody seems, I think it was recorded, but I've just never been able to come across the video. I God, I wish I could remember that guy's name.
Maybe we can get the Lions of Liberty audience to make some noise and try to find the video.
So he was a philosophy guy. Yeah. So somebody asked him about, is this how borders have always been? And he said, well, borders traditionally have been a line of sovereignty. So they didn't used to really be like a line to keep people out, just a line to let people know, like, oh, you're no longer in that territory. You're on this side of the line. You now abide by our rules.
It wasn't a barrier. It was just a signifier of you're now in this other place.
Right. So I think that is more or less the way that it should be, because every other part of immigration that people complain about, the violence, the culture, all that kind of stuff kind of takes care of itself. Like murder is already illegal. So you're not going to stop somebody from murdering them or from murdering just by having a border. Like the immigration violation does not have anything to do with violent behavior.
Especially, I mean, and Alex has done a lot of work on this. I mean, if you actually look at the numbers, like, of murders and violent actions by illegal immigrants, they're real, that happens, but they're at a lower rate than Americans are committing the same crimes usually. So we're really, I mean, unless we're going to start arguing for deporting all those same Americans, then, where are we at?
Well, and he brings up the best point in that paper. He says, if you were to move all these illegal immigrants out of your community, your crime rate would rise because they're keeping your crime rate down because they commit fewer crimes.
Right.
So if you took all the illegal immigrants and even the legal immigrants out of your community, your crime rate would skyrocket because you just took the people that are holding it down out of the equation.
Interesting way to look at it.
So yeah, I mean, I would love to see a decentralized anarchist view of come and go as you please, and we'll deal with whatever else is, comes along with, all the baggage that you bring with you. We'll deal with that, with other means, but on an individual basis. Mm-hmm. But I think a more realistic and very doable policy would be work permits for anybody who wants them. Like, basically, if somebody shows up at the border, at a port of entry, and says, "Yeah, I'm from Mexico or Guatemala or El Salvador or whatever, and I want to come work for a while." Okay, have you, make a phone call back to their village in wherever they're from and try to find out if they've ever done anything violent to anybody, mm-hmm. and if they haven't, fine, okay, come in and work, and here's a card that says you can do so. And you're still not eligible for benefits or anything like that. And it's not a citizenship and it's not a residency. It's just, if you want to come work, go for it. And if you decide once you're here that you want to start applying for citizenship, fine. There's a pathway for that. But I think in reading stuff that David Beer and Alex Nurasta have written, and also just talking to many of the immigrants themselves, they don't want to come here and put down roots. Most of the people I talked to did not want to come be citizens of the United States. Right. They wanted to come, reunite with their family, work for a while, and save up enough money to go buy a piece of property in Mexico. Mm-hmm. In fact, my last boss, after I left the Border Patrol, my supervisor for my job that I took afterwards, he had a green card. And he's like, I'm not going to stay here till I retire. I'm going to work here long enough to, when my kids get old enough to take care of themselves and I've saved enough money that I can go back to Mexico, I'm going back to Mexico. And he goes back to Mexico every weekend. So he's a legal resident and he doesn't want to stay here. He's just here because it makes sense to be here. So I think, and in that case, if you have that many workers coming in, businesses that are looking to grow right now, if they have a steady flow of people willing to work, well, then our economy does nothing but benefit from that. And then all those people, those American citizens that have been working at those companies the whole time, well, now management positions open up. And those people that have put in their time, they can improve their lives too. So,
and those same immigrants that are living here and working here are using local services. They're utilizing all the businesses around them. They're helping the economy around them by participating in it.
Right. So I think a very robust worker, guest worker program, combining that with ending the drug war solves about 90% of our problems. Like, we're left with very little to deal with.
Plus, if you have the drug war, you take those cartels down a huge notch. I mean, they might still attempt to control the border, I'm sure, but you're at least cutting off a lot of their funding.
Right. I mean, but if you take away their funding and you take away the vast majority of their power,
they got nothing.
Well, there's going to be a ton of people who didn't really want to leave their homeland in the first place. If it's less violent and it's a safer place to be, they're just not going to leave in the first place. Like, they're just not going to leave. So, and if, fine, if they want to, come on in my opinion. But, those are kind of my two is, I'd love to see fully open borders someday. I'd love to live in that world where people really can just have autonomy over themselves, really make their own future. But in the interim, I'd be happy to see like people kind of come and go as they please.
Anything better than we have now, really.
Right.
Well, Josh, it's been awesome having you on, man, and awesome hearing your story. I think we were able to get into a few different areas that I didn't quite hear you touch on in some of the other interviews. So I was really glad to have you on here and really share your sort of journey here into where you are now. So before I let you go, though, I know, like I said, you're an outspoken advocate of the stuff you write and speak regularly about these topics. So why don't you just let everybody out there know where they can find out more about your work, how they can reach out to you, or whatever info you want to give out, or anything you want to plug, feel free to plug away.
You can follow me on Twitter at Josh D. Childress.
I'm not sure if I even follow you on Twitter, so let me go take care of that while you plug.
Yeah, I'll look for you. That's the only social media I have. I had a fiction writing website that I let expire because of all this, I haven't really been doing any work in that area.
Been a little busy.
Right. So I hope to get that up again someday, but for right now, Twitter's kind of the best place to find me.
All right. Well, Josh Childress, thank you so much, man, for coming on the show. It's been great hearing your story. Keep up the great work and keep on roaring.
Thanks, Marc.
All right, kitty cats. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Joshua Childress, someone I've been looking to have on to talk about his journey for quite some time, and he did not disappoint. I hope you got as much value out of that conversation as I did, and I don't have much more to leave you with today except to remind you that it's not just me here on Lions of Liberty, not just me here when I bring you the flagship show every single Monday with interviews with leaders in the Liberty movement, with roundtable discussions, libertarians in living rooms drinking liquor, even the occasional debate, all of these wonderful things. But it doesn't end there, because every Wednesday, Brian McWilliams brings you his weekly shot of comedy, culture, and liberty on Electric Liberty Land, while John Odie Odermatt wraps things up on Fridays with his inspiring look at the broken criminal justice system on Felony Friday. You get all of this for the price of one, and that price is free. Just hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify. We're all over the place. However you like to listen, we're just glad to have you. And if you really do want to give us money, if you really insist, we got a couple ways you can do that. You can go to paypal.me/Lions of Liberty and give a one-time donation. You can also go to lionsofliberty.com/donate for all sorts of ways you can donate through various cryptocurrencies. You can also join our Patreon for access to live streams, bonus audio content, bonus video content, bonus shows with guests, all sorts of extra fun that you get in return for joining the Lions of Liberty Pride on Patreon. Again, patreon.com/Lions of Liberty. Next week, we're going to have a little bit more of the conversation on immigration for you. I'm actually going to run a conversation Brian and I had as an exclusive live stream for the Lions of Liberty Pride about the immigration issue. We had that conversation about a month ago. That is going to run here next week, along with a podcast that we recorded live at a LA Libertarian County Party. I think I said those words in the wrong order. Libertarian Party of Los Angeles County event that we did out here with Adam Kokesh a few weeks ago. So we're going to be running some of that for you as well. And until then, folks, don't forget to tune in on Wednesday for Brian McWilliams and Electric Liberty Land. And of course, wrap things up on Friday with Odie and Felony Friday. And until next week, kids, live long and live free.